Good afternoon. Fancy new intro there for Moth News Live. That's mostly just I wanted to put in pictures of my different hairstyles. That's basically what it is. There's other people in there as well, but they don't matter. You're very welcome to Moth News Live. I'm your host, Keith Walsh, and today's show is packed with stories that demand attention, accountability, and some action. From shocking accounts of neglect in Irish nursing homes. What's new? Here we go again. To whistleblowers' battle against VAT fraud, and we have interviews with some incredibly courageous individuals who have made their voices heard in the face of adversity. We'll explore a very personal story of survival and justice that will spark important conversations. So stay with us for the next hour of hard hitting news and insightful interviews. I'm also a poet. You can contact me on my Instagram to order some poetry. Now, let's get into some headlines. Former NBC war correspondent Susan Burt wins €17,500 in a case against Irish ferries. Susan Bart is a 75-year-old former war correspondent, and she has been awarded €17,500 in damages following what was described in court as a hideous and harrowing experience aboard the Irish ferries vessel, the MV Epsilon, during a storm Imogen almost 10 years ago. I have been on Irish ferries, and it's always harrowing and it's always difficult. And that's mostly because there's just a bar open all the time. And by the time you get off, you feel like you've been on a ferry. I wonder would I get 17,500? Anyway, a man in County Tyrone, his name is Stephen McCourt. He has been sentenced to a minimum of 24 years for the brutal murder and dismemberment of Damien Hegney. The details of the crime, which involved dumping his body into a reservoir, have shocked the community, but they haven't shocked the community enough to burn anybody out of their house, because obviously this man grew up in Ireland, so it doesn't count. Fine Gael TD Grace Boland is calling for immediate action, this is very important, to address the public transport issue in Dublin, especially following major concerts. Fans attending concerts by international artists such as Olivia Rodrigo and Dua Lipa have been left stranded or forced to wait hours for transport. I think they could just cancel Dua Lipa and then not have any concerts. Then we could just all be grand. Actually, I'm not an old fogey saying, "Hey, what's that noise?" But what's that noise? Now, we do want to hear from you today. So here is our viewer question. What do you think needs to be done to improve public transport after major events in Dublin? Do share your thoughts with us in the comment section below, or you can share your thoughts on TikTok or Twitter or X or whatever the hell you call it, or wherever the hell you are. Now, we're turning to a deeply personal and courageous story. His name is Ali, and his surname is Quooss. He's not British, but he's come forward to share his experience of sexual assault by a well-known British entertainer. He has named the accused on his social media, sparking an important conversation about legal processes, survivor bravery, and the complexities of public accusations. Now, this full interview will be available once I check it for legal reasons. It will be available to watch on our YouTube over the weekend, so keep an eye out for that. I do have to say that this person that is named hasn't been convicted of anything. These are only allegations at this point. I would also like to say that this person's legal team contacted Ali. I think it was 2 weeks ago on a Sunday night. He got an email at 1 a.m. to say that he was to cease and desist. They threatened to bring him to court and to sue him for whatever they wanted to sue him for. They also tried to get an injunction, and he ended up having to go to court over a team. It was on a Teams call. But he went to court, and this person's legal team tried to get an injunction on him talking about his experience, and the judge threw it out. So that's why he was able to talk about it and continue to talk about it. So some of this has been before the courts. A judge has said that he's allowed to continue to talk about his experience. The judge's remarks at the time were that it seemed like the celebrity was more interested in protecting his own reputation rather than worried about what he might have done to anybody. So that was the judge's own view on things, and he said, "Carry on." knock yourself out. So so this is Ali talking about his experience, and I think this is possibly the first time he's spoken about it on social media. This is the first time a news and current affairs platform has allowed him to mention the name of the person. It's a bit of an exclusive. Thank you, Ali, for talking to us.
So your allegations are around the Little Britain star, Matt Lucas. And I have to say this word, but the alleged sexual assaults took place before and then in around COVID, and then it's around that time period, isn't it? And then you really took your time, you really thought about it, and actually, I would say, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, there was a period where you weren't quite sure. It just kind of dawned on you slowly. The more you said, it was almost like a light bulb moment where you said, actually, I was groomed here. I've been assaulted, because it's not that clear. And people are very quick to judge victims of assault and, say, oh, well, how did you not know? How could you? Well, I would have done this, blah, blah, blah. Like, we don't know. Nobody knows. It's an incredibly strange, odd, discombobulating, disconcerting thing to happen to you. You just don't know. People don't know how to react, and everybody reacts differently. But it slowly kind of dawned on you as the pieces fell into place in your mind, as you dwelt on it, as you gave yourself time. What had happened?
It didn't take me that long. I mean, it took me probably 2 weeks from when the last assault happened, because it happened once, and then he managed to play it off as a misunderstanding. So once I'd made my boundaries clear, I didn't want to go to his house again, but he managed to lie and manipulate me in a way that would make me go to his house.
Yeah. So the second time he invited you, you said, okay, well.
Yeah, and so this all happened in February this year. So this we met around COVID online for the first time, but there was a long process of grooming in between. So we had this online relationship that never was romantic or sexual in any way. It was always a mentor, father figure sort of thing. There was no romance.
So you, as an artist, an illustrator, you were speaking to him, hoping, and you felt that he would be able to promote your work using his large following and contacts and all that kind of stuff. And that's why you were talking to him.
Yeah, he's a children's book author. So my goal was to find work through him, and I was really clear about that when I messaged him.
So first time you met, he passed off the assault as a misunderstanding, and this seems to be his some people use this modus operandi where they will publicly say that they don't, get social cues, and they kind of like preempt any allegations by saying these things publicly. And I've heard it before. I've heard it from people who aren't celebrity. I've heard people like say, well, I just don't understand social cues. And I would say,
I'm autistic.
I'm autistic, so I don't understand social cues. If you are autistic and you know that and you don't understand social cues, you need to be 100% sure. It's even more important that you get consent. Then that would be my thinking. It's not an excuse. He should have said to you, I don't get social cues. Is this what's happening? And you at that point would have been able to say no, but he didn't say that. And I think that the onus is on the person who doesn't get the social cues. Consent is huge. It's more important that you make sure, beyond shadow of a doubt, that you are not misreading these social cues if you are autistic or you don't get social cues. So then the second time you sort of said, well, he invited you to a party, etc. And you said, okay, but nothing, you were very clear about what this was.
Yeah.
And yet.
Yeah, and this is...
I know you don't want to get into details, and I just want to get people up to speed, So, but yet you made sure that he knew, and then he ended up going back to his house, and it happened again.
Back to his house, and I am at this stage. I'm convinced that I was drugged there because of there, I remember the night very, very clearly because I don't drink and I don't really do drugs. And I think he administered some drugs into my drink while he went upstairs to get the delivery order ready. And I was downstairs setting up a kid's projector nightlight type thing for him while Oscar was playing on TV.
So this is a thing that he did because he'd been there before. He had a projector and he'd play.
This was that night, that same night. So I told you about the projector before.
Yeah.
And so that's that same night.
That was the same night.
Mm-hmm.
And
But the first night, it was also very childlike. He was playing his own music the whole night, and also live on the piano.
Mm-hmm.
But it was all children's kiddie stuff all the time, both nights. And that's what made me think, I think this guy's a pedo. And then also looking at the way he groomed me. Because I was telling my neighbor what happened. And he said to me, "You got groomed." And then I was like, fuck, yes, I was. And then it made sense. All of the little interactions that we had where I was like, why did he say that? Like, that was a bit weird. Everything fell into place. But he did it so invisibly, so sly. And I was like, he must have done this 100 times before. Because not even me, I hardly even noticed that it happened. It's fucking scary. Sorry, bro.
No, it's okay.
And that's why I was so passionate about speaking about it, because I had a feeling that because he used the classic picture book child grooming techniques on me.
Thank you very much, Ali, for sharing your story with us and for coming forward. And I do believe we'll be hearing and seeing a lot more of Ali. He did use a word in there that I do have to say that there's been no conviction so far. These are all allegations, and the reason I believe Ali used a word is because since he has come forward, he has heard from other people who have given their version of events that happened to them. One particular woman who was a mother who has been trying to report this to the police. The Met in London don't seem to be terribly interested in looking into this. In fact, when Ali went to the Met, to the police metropolitan in London, they said that there needs to be more than one allegation. There needs to be more people. He's pretty sure there's about 25 people, if not more, have come forward now. So the question is, why has there been no investigation by the police at this point? So look, this is very interesting. As I said, there was a word used in there, and I just want to say about that word, there's been no conviction so far. But this is Ali's story, and we're happy to share it. So moving on, we spoke then during the week. Actually, it was this morning. To Susan McCluskey. So we've been talking to people who have had difficult experiences, traumatic experiences in care homes in Ireland with the CHI, with the HSC, and private healthcare, private care facilities. There was a documentary that went out on RTE 2 weeks ago, and one of the places they spoke about was Beneavin Manor Nursing Home. So Susan got in touch with us, and she said she'd like to talk to us about her experience. Her husband, who was a young enough man, has Alzheimer's, is in another home now, and seems to be happy in that home. So Susan shared her story. Her husband was in Beneavin Manor Nursing Home for 9 days, where he suffered neglect, abuse, and there was misconduct. And Susan experienced things and saw things that she wanted to highlight and talk about. So this story highlights the ongoing challenges in the Irish care home sector and calls for urgent reforms. Once again, we'll be sick to the back teeth of calling for urgent reforms. Let's have a listen to some of this interview. If you want to watch the rest of this interview, it is available on our YouTube channel, or you can watch it on X as well. Have a look at this.
Beans or some crap.
Oh God.
Yeah, and it was cold, and it was just take it, leave it, do what you like. And I was saying this to the kids then. Our son went up then that evening to see him. And I'm trying to remember now. Yeah, so I was saying this, and our son-in-law said, you know, he said, when I was outside feeding Mick his lunch yesterday, he said, there was a lady there who didn't have dementia. She had something wrong with her breathing, and that's why she was in there, because she couldn't manage at home. And she was very well with it. And she asked for something else for dinner, that she didn't like the dinner. And he told her she could have a bowl of ice cream.
And that was the only alternative.
Yeah, that was the only alternative. Now, they gave out bowls of ice cream. I have to be honest to you. I think they gave out the bowls of ice cream so they didn't have to give out drinks to the people. Do you know? If they didn't drink, they'd eat the ice cream. So then, and then he witnessed an old man sitting on his own at the table, because he was still sitting there with me. An old man sitting at the table, and he said he was finishing his ice cream. And one of the people came along and said, listen, I need to wash that bowl. You need to hurry up eating your ice cream. And she took the bowl off him. And the old man just let her. There was no, like, I was going, this place is mad. So on the Sunday, then I was up there all day Sunday with him. There was music on the Sunday from 2:30. The music came in. A lovely chap came in to sing for them. And he spent about an hour and a half there, and it was great. And a chap that I knew, another patient I knew upstairs, he's interrelated into the family. I knew him. I knew he was upstairs, and his son came down with him. And he loved the music, and that was grand. So that was on the Sunday, and like that, we were now starting to bring food up to Mick, because I just couldn't let him eat the food that was there. On the Monday, which was the bank holiday, his brother and sister went up to see him on the Monday morning around 11 o'clock. And when they went up, they found him lying in bed, the curtains pulled, in the dark, terrified out of his wits. A cup of tea and a few biscuits sitting on the tray beside him. Mick doesn't know that cup of tea and them biscuits are sitting there. And he doesn't know how to get up out of the bed. But they brought him in, left him there. If they don't eat him or drink that cup of tea, they're gone. It was his fault that he didn't eat them. You know, well, like, we gave them to him. He didn't eat them. So yeah.
But there was no understanding that this particular, there was no, like, they weren't looking at individual clients or residents. They weren't going, well, this is Mick. Mick needs to be helped with his tea. He needs to be sat up, given his tea, given his biscuits, reminded that these biscuits are for him, or whatever. So what time was it when they called in to see him then?
That was 11 o'clock in the morning. So I reckon that Mick had missed his breakfast that morning.
But he'd missed his breakfast.
Yeah, because if they'd done the same thing, and he was still in the bed.
Because he forgot to set his alarm and get up and get dressed and come down for his breakfast.
Or else he brought it in and put it on the table beside him, and then came back half an hour later and said, "Oh, you didn't eat your breakfast, Mick. That's grand."
Then came in then with his 11s.
Yeah, exactly.
Should the lad be starved in a
well, we discovered that. Okay. So then I came up about 20 to 12, and his brother and sister was awful upset. They said, you know, he was lying here in the dark and he was frightened, and they tried to get him up. And so anyway, I noticed they were kind of heading off then after a while, and I noticed that Mick was wet, and the nappy that he had on him was fairly full. So I called in one of the carers. Now, this was a nice girl, and I said, look, you wouldn't change him. And she said, with that, the dinner came in. And I said, look, we'll give him his dinner, because I knew he was hungry at that stage. And I gave him whatever dinner they gave him. And I gave him his dinner, and then she came in and she gave him a shower. But the bed was wet, the clothes was wet in the bed, and they had left him lying in his own urine in that bed. So then I stayed with him all that day, Monday, until 4:30, and one of our sons came in at 4:30, and he took over. And he fed him at the table in the dining room. And then he was told, well, you can't be sitting in the dining room with him, feed them. Now, that might be for other patients, and I get that. But he didn't know. They should have told him before that, that you can't be sitting in the dining room
Why
to feed
can't you
them.
be sitting in the dining room to feed him?
No, you have to bring them into the ward to feed them,
Okay.
or into their room to feed them. So then our other son.
Would you know why that would be, or?
I don't know if it's for the care of other patients around. I don't know. But it seems to be a thing in the nursing homes that if they're going to have their food with you, they have it in the rooms.
In the rooms.
And you don't have to sit at the table. I don't know why. But to me, it wouldn't make any difference. To me, it wouldn't. Like if I was feeding Mick at a table and I seen somebody else that needed to be fed,
yeah, and
I would help them as well.
Yeah, also because there has been a lot of talk about this idea of family members being allowed in and doing some of the work, helping the staff, I suppose. So doing the feeding and doing the caring, doing the cleaning, and they're just like buddy system or whatever. So it does seem to be a bit of a sort of an odd rule. If it is across
but it seems to be the rule
because you want them because you'd like them out of the. You want them out of the ward or out of the room and out and about and eating with other people, and because you've got to keep them stimulated. You've got I'd imagine with Alzheimer's, if you don't keep them stimulated, they'll go down.
Well, this is it, and that's one thing they weren't doing there. There was no stimulation whatsoever in that place. It was just sit there, look at the. Remember a lady in the chair in a big wheelchair. Actually, she was on the television, and she sat there for hours, all day long. She sat in that chair, and I was going, God, that poor woman must be. Now, the woman was just lying there, and her head was just down, and I thought, but you would lose the will to live yourself in that place. You would lose the will to live. There was nothing fresh and bright to look at. There was no stimulation whatsoever. And as I said, the 3 people that I did meet that came in with smiles on their faces and tried to do their best were carrying the load of the rest of them. The rest of them just didn't care. So Monday went by. Tuesday wasn't too bad. Don't remember and big about Tuesday. Wednesday, one of our grandsons went up and he was there from 1:00. And he found his granddad still lying in bed with the curtains pulled. His granddad couldn't get out of the bed. Now, we did notice at this stage that Mick was very off with everything. And I did notice them on the Tuesday. That was what I noticed, that he came in and gave him his medication at like 1:15. And I said, why are you giving him that? Oh, we need it at this time. And I said, but he doesn't get medication at this time. I said, I told you, he gets his medication in the morning around 5:00, 5:30 in the evening, and then at bedtime. No, we have to. The doctor said we have to. And I said, oh, okay. And but what I realised then was they were giving it to when they wanted to give it to him, not when they were supposed to give it to him. So on the Wednesday when
yeah, you can watch the rest of that interview on our YouTube channels, and I'll just pop that up on the screen there. And yeah, just another harrowing story. Like, it just seems to be. I'd say I could just ask anybody who's been in any of those nursing homes to chat to me, and I'd hear something horrific. And Susan was caring for her husband, who was quite a young man to be suffering from Alzheimer's. She told me in the interview that it runs in the family. She had been a cleaner herself when she was a working woman, and so when when someone like that goes into a place like this, they're noticing the dirt, they're noticing the dust, they're noticing, she mentions the bathroom hadn't been cleaned in 3 days. Now, the bathroom hadn't been cleaned in 3 days. This was at the same time that this particular care home was being featured in an undercover sting operation documentary on RTE about how badly it was run. So this had been on the television. And the reason she knew the toilet hadn't been cleaned was because she noticed there was a piece of paper that it was on the floor, and it was still on the floor 3 days later. So the toilet hadn't been cleaned. She had, I suppose, it's hard for someone like Susan to finally admit that she's done as much as she can do. Like, her husband was gone, effectively. The man she loved was gone. She still wanted to look after him. But to make that decision to allow or to put a loved one into a care home when you've been caring for them yourselves, and I know by her, she has incredibly high standards, is a very difficult thing to do. So for that, to have to do that, first of all, to lose your husband to this terrible disease, then to have to decide and finally come to the realization that you can't care for them anymore because it's just too much. He didn't really know what was going on. He didn't know what was going on at all. As you heard there, he couldn't even get himself out of bed. So that was the best place for him. But the trauma of what she'd experienced, of becoming a carer for someone that should have been, her partner, her husband, her lover, do you know what I mean? Like, these are humans. And then she's suddenly a carer for this man. And then she's putting him into the care of other people who do not give a fuck. Can you imagine how that is? And this is Susan's story. But I've spoken to 12 people alone in the last few weeks who have similar, even more horrific stories about putting loved ones into care homes in Ireland. And I'm not even going to blame the staff, because they're treated terribly. They're paid very badly. So there's no like, the morale in the place is low. They just lumped a load of people that, the society doesn't care about into the same building and just left them, walked away. And we're not doing anything about it. Meanwhile, the private companies who own these care homes, there's the company, I won't mention them now, but they own about 1,000 care homes around Europe. They're making profits. So you have to wonder, if somebody in their care dies prematurely because of lack of care, but they're still making money out of it, are they not accomplices to some sort of crime? That would be my interpretation of it. That would be my interpretation of the law in this case. But it seems that maybe some people are protected by the law, whereas other people have to follow the law. I wouldn't get away with not paying a parking ticket. Anyway, that's Susan's story. You can follow the rest of that. You can watch the rest of that on our YouTube channel at your leisure. The details are there. Now, from one scandal. Jeez, it's a heavy one today. And it is Friday, guys. It is. Lots of reasons to be happy. I just don't have any of them on the show at the moment. We should go back to talking about public transport problems after Dua Lipa concert, shouldn't we? Really, but nobody's texted in with any suggestions, so I'm at a loss. Okay, let's move on. So Alo Mohan was the first person we interviewed on MOTH when we started out. Before we even had this fancy studio. We were just doing it from our gaffs. Alo, at the time, came to talk to us about a VAT fraud that was happening. He's a former chicken farmer who has been at the forefront of exposing this massive VAT fraud scheme in the poultry sector. Despite facing years of harassment, losing his business, he had buildings burnt down. Alo's moral stance has led to a victory this week, with the government finally moving to close the exploited flat rate VAT system. It was a thing that it's fraud, and he saw it as fraud, and he said, I'm not doing this. But larger, bigger poultry providers, companies were doing this. Sometimes up to 1,000, they were claiming up to 1,000% VAT returns, which is astounding, and they were being protected. Nobody was being. In fact, I don't know if Alo mentioned it in this clip, but in fact, when the Minister for Finance came out and said, "Oh, we're closing this thing. We're not allowing this fraud to happen anymore. He apologized to the people who were using this fraudulent system to gain the system, and basically, because he wanted to highlight it, there were certain people that weren't happy about that, and they were like, he was intimidated and his buildings were burnt down and he lost his business. So he's still in court trying to fight all of that. This is Alo Mohan, and we're joined by Al as well, who's away, would you believe? He was in a different country, and would you believe his signal isn't great? I know. So he does come in and out, but it's hopefully, I just want to apologize for Al's technical stuff there, but the interview is very interesting. So we'll play it there.
Yeah, Alo, yeah, we were just discussing before he joined. You know, it's kind of where you've got the indirect, direct pressure, right, of what you've been dealing with on a personal level, and then you're dealing with your a legal battle where the counterparty or the person that you're protecting yourself against has essentially a blank check, like they've bottomless. A bottomless pit of taxpayers' money in terms of a legal case that you're trying to battle against that. And I just like, as Keith correctly said, it's just mind-boggling that we're heading into like a plethora of issues where this is now becoming a common trend, where people are doing something wrong, unethical, fraud, and then they've got the backing of the state in terms of legal process where the legal representatives have a blank check, basically.
I think
what does that do for you in terms of reaction? Just interested to hear your feedback on that.
I think you shall both be astonished to hear that last Wednesday, when I was in the High Court, the barrister representing the Irish Revenue sat down beside myself and my colleague Steve and apologised to me, said that they actually know that I'm right and I'm only doing my job. Yeah, and
although that does not surprise me in the slightest, because again, this is total tangent, but we are going to be covering this in depth in the next while, because I don't know if you've been tracking some of the other stuff we covered, which is Dundrum. Now that's coming out, that's breaking, right? That this guy has been using corrupt resources to defend against his actions. We know that this individual uses a very established insolvency practitioner, again, who has blank check in terms of, you know, representing the revenue to be able to, you know, just go in and liquidate a company, move the assets out. Oh, he's the revenues guy, right? So this is not just exclusive to your experience. And as you said, it falls under the guise, it's not personal, it's just business. I just do my job. It's not personal. I know you're right, but I still have to do my job.
And Alo, we're seeing the same, like, because we're talking to people who have had a very difficult experience, very traumatizing experiences with care homes, you know, with care providers in this country, hospitals, the Children's Hospital, and it all comes down to, as you talk about the elite, we talked about it before, like the top 5%, the people who are making money. You mentioned tax haven, you talk about intimidation, you talk about, you know, the small, like essentially you were driven out of your industry because you wanted to do the right thing. Whistleblowers in every department, you know, in every facet of this country are. It's easier to intimidate them and to make out and tell lies about them. We've seen that before with Tusla. Tell lies about them, ruin their lives. Yeah. Some, as you mentioned, and there's been more, you know, take their own lives. And it's much more important, it seems, in this country that we protect the wealthy and we protect the institution rather than we look after the people who are trying to do the right thing. And that is shocking. It's shocking to me because we've done so many of us that this is so prevalent. It's happening everywhere.
The saddest part of all of this is I was the national chairman of the Irish Farm Association for poultry. And it was the chief economist of the Irish Farmers Association directed me to check this up and to make sure that I'd done my due diligence by getting independent financial advice. And my advice was that this was false invoicing, false accounting, and fraud. and Marion Harkin, as an MEP, she took her due diligence with a former revenue official who became tax consultant, Eugene Dolan, who stated this was the biggest scam he had ever seen in Europe, bigger than the Halifax case in the UK. And here's me doing my job as a representative of farmers, and Marion Harkin was doing her job as a representative of her area. And I had done so much work with her, voluntary work, you know, between for football, for food in the Taste of Cavan, and all the different events that I've been working with. And to this day, and even last week when we were talking, she is still in shock. And she says, everybody knows what this is. And remember, you have a justice commissioner who's seen this and passed on the documents to the Irish Revenue, because he said he had to by law, because as a chartered accountant, he was obliged, if he's seen what he believed was fraud, which the documents we showed him was fraud, he passed them on to Revenue. He met in the Finance Committee and said he knew this was fraud, but he didn't know what to do in relation to this. And there he is the Justice Commissioner of the EU. Mm-hmm. So, you know, how could my advice to any citizen is, if you see abuse of elderly, of children, of environment, of anything, my advice is you look the other way, because there is a political class and a regulatory class in Ireland, and their job, by you coming forward thinking you've done the right thing, their job nearly is to destroy you, is to deny you justice, and to delay.
I mean, this is who we are. This is Ireland now.
Yeah.
You know,
only the brave, Alo. That's it.
Yeah. I don't know if it's a brave or it's foolish, because we have a whole opposition to which are meant to be able to take up this task and say, right, this is wrong, and be able to pursue these things, and they're scared because they have senior civil servants that will approach them and tell them to look the other way. And I know that because Michael Fitzmaurice and Marion Harkin had two senior revenue officials who told them, listen, this is an industrial policy and you have to stop talking about it.
Why are these senior civil servants telling people to look the other way? What's in it for them? I don't understand. Is it to protect the wealthy?
Of course it is. That, like, if you look at a company called Cappoquin Poultry, that the CEO couldn't understand. He had bought this in good faith, and he realized an awful lot of the regulatory bodies around him were trying to close him down. And he had hundreds of people employed down in Cappoquin and County Waterford. And for him to find out that what he was competing against was companies that were getting millions upon millions of a tax advantage over him, that he couldn't compete against. So he realized that what was happening here was select companies, and you can tell me, Enterprise Ireland or the Department of Finance can say, why were select companies allowed to commit fraud? Because it's making an absolute mockery of the single market. It's making a mockery of free trade. And it's making a mockery of Irish taxpayers. And I think this is back to a golden circle. We have seen so many examples of Minister Paschal Donoghue, where individuals have seemingly profited from very lucrative situations where were closely linked to him. And that's when somebody like him comes out and says things like that he's sorry for what has happened. I actually wonder then what direction this country is and how blatant the people are, but also the integrity of journalists, that they can't actually see what this actually is and come out and explain what this exactly is. This is a massive VAT fraud, tax fraud, and the saddest part of in courts all over Ireland, we have individuals with family have been sent to prison for 100% VAT over claim. And the people that were committing 1000% VAT over claim were allowed to continue it for 10 years. They blamed COVID and Brexit. Like, how insulting is that to ordinary people? And what do you call, these people have been given a green light and said, don't worry, you've got it away with this. And I'll explain to you, when we went to the European Commission, when they investigated this at the very start, this was back in 2016, not only were the revenue not investigating it, they were giving letters of comfort. They had copies of false invoices, and they had copies of letters showing people how to destroy their documents and not show their accountant. They had all of the evidence to show criminality. And they wrote to the same individuals, and they wrote to Marion Harkin stating that that was in line with their business thinking, and that they would never go after them retrospectively. They would only go after them prospectively. In other words, you continue for as long as you want. It doesn't matter. You will never be prosecuted. And that's the type of revenue that we have. And I know it shocks, because we have so many good individuals in Irish revenue. And I know they are some of them, talking to them as individuals, they will tell you that they are sickened by what's going on here, because this goes against the grain of everything that they represent in Irish revenue. And I also explained, when we were sent by Dublin Castle VAT Interpretation Unit to Ashtown in Dublin, to the prosecution unit, that they said that they couldn't take the evidence of us because it implicated their senior colleagues. And they said that people would be on the streets if they knew that the way this tax system was working.
It's mind-boggling. I presume, is this so? So they've come out and said, "Oh yeah, right, we'll change our minds on that. We're going to roll back on that." He's apologized to the fraudsters, to the people who've been committing fraud. He's apologized to them for taking this loophole away from them.
Well,
I mean, did you ever get an apology? Will you ever get an apology?
Well, don't ever call it a loophole. It is not a loophole.
Yeah, sorry.
This was absolute and utter fraud and criminality. So anybody that calls this a loophole is wrong. And I have the evidence to prove it. I wouldn't be able to say it. And I have said this from the very start. When you create false invoices, when you create false accounting, when you do deception, when you artificially inflate products to double the market price, when you have to insure products for maybe something on my own farm, we had to insure the feed to 1.3 million above the market price, then that is not a loophole. That is blatant fraud, that where the Irish revenue were nothing more than the gatekeeper to allow the people what levels are allowed to keep it. Remember, if this is a loophole and it is perfectly legal, then any farmer, any ordinary beef,
everybody
sheep,
everybody
can do this tomorrow morning if it's legal. But it's not. It's neither a loophole or legal. It is absolute fraud.
So he's apologizing for stopping these big companies from committing fraud.
Yes.
Sorry for stopping this illegal practice that you have been profiting from.
Yes.
Not apologizing to you, who lost your livelihood, your farm. Probably, I'm sure you had some dark times. You've lost friends. The Marion you mentioned a few times. I'm sure she, as you said, like, she's still in shock. She still can't believe it. She's an elected representative. She's a politician. You think politicians would be safe and could come out and say what they need to say, and they won't be threatened, or nobody will have words with them. Is this it? Like, are you going? Can you take them? Can you take the government to court? Can you get something?
We are in court, and to take the actual Irish revenue for misfeasance for public office, and under the Frankovich case, which means that if you don't want to participate in breaches of European law, that you're entitled to compensation. I also, after the first investigation back in 2016 by DG Taxation the Commission, they asked me to go to the national courts here for recourse. I have the Taoiseach at the moment who wrote to the Department of Finance to assist me in meeting with me and to get recourse. And all of that has fallen on deaf ears. But I will say one thing: nobody should be shocked, because if you think of the situation where the women with cervical cancer, they were negotiating with these same people on their deathbeds. So that doesn't shock me about the methodology of what is happening here. If you think of the little girl Grace who was abused, they sent her back to the abusers. And you didn't hear Michael Noonan coming out and apologizing. You didn't hear anybody like Terry Prone coming out and apologising profusely about Catherine Curlis and about all of the bodies that were found over in Galway. So there's nothing shocking about this. All what it is, and it has been in the papers, you can see the 3 Ds: deny, delay, and what they call destroy.
Yeah.
And at some stage, we have to have people, politicians that are strong enough. But I guarantee you have senior civil servants like Robert Watts that come out, and politicians are scared of them. They're absolutely scared of them. We have a country that is being run by almost what you could call is a junta, and that our politicians are little more than cardboard cutouts and actually are not running this country. And the real powerhouse and the decision making is being done by elite civil servants.
And high on their own ego, probably. I don't know if we spoke about it, Al, on here, but it's the Leinster House show. They turn up with the suits and they go into the building. And then they go off and they speak to the news and they blabber on about this or that and not really say anything, but they're not actually. I mean, the more and more you look into this stuff, you realize they're not actually having any. They have no say. It's. I'm not surprised that they're. It doesn't shock me what you're saying. It sounds conspiratorial.
I know it's. I don't know if it sounds any. Well, it is a conspiracy because they've conspired to do these things, but in relation to politicians, I think there's so many examples now that conspiratorial kind of goes out the window.
Yeah, maybe people are starting to see that. Well, actually, this is too obvious to be, conspiratorial at this stage. Yeah,
I've spoken to so many. The late Bobby Alward was in a business committee where he was investigating this through the Competition Authority, and the Competition Authority, the head of it, Miss Goggins at the time, came in and she told either blatant lies or she went in and she misled that committee. And I asked both the committee and her to correct the record, but they don't and they won't. So there is that sense that they are untouchable. Which is really, really sad. And it's even the same scenario when we went into the central bank to a point where they got so scared nobody would actually sign off on the letters coming from the central bank. They actually just said it was the desk that was actually signing off the letters. That's how fearful these individuals, the civil servants at a junior level, fear. Like, I had a situation where one of the revenue officials sent her brother to my house because she was afraid that she'd been involved in this and didn't want to come out. I had another revenue official that was at the curtilage of our house, surveillance. Then we had an illegal investigation into our family where they were sending pictures from a website about my children and my wife, and saying this is interesting about Alo, and showing different clippings from newspapers and everything else. So that type of activity that has taken place has been outrageous. And I could go on here for the next half hour to tell you they have a 10-year plan of intimidation that has taken place, and it would shock most people. And the amount of pulse numbers that we have over the years. I don't know what they call at some stage what they call it probably will be investigated. I really don't know. I do know people like Catherine Connolly that we met over the years, and Paolo Turbine and all of them. They've tried in their own way, but they feel that they can only take it so far, and that's it is sad, because if you're punishing people that refuse to be part of fraud and refuse to be part of these type of fraudulent practices, and then you're praising the people that are practicing them, then you'd have to ask yourself, what kind of morals have we as an Irish society? And that hasn't been asked. It really pains me, because you're raising children to what you call to come into a world where what do you tell them? That the people at the most senior level are willing to do anything to cover up corruption in Ireland.
I mean, yeah, you have to tell people the truth. You have to tell your children the truth, and you bring up people to be good, upstanding members of society, and you want them to do the right thing, and then like a man like yourself, you're destroyed by your own country, the country you're trying to do the right thing by, because you care. What's the next steps then? Where do you go from here?
Well, we're back in court on the 18th of September, and the judge was very, very reasonable the last time, because I had been told what was going to happen, and I announced it in court. And the judge said herself that this is outrageous. This has to be dealt with as soon as possible. She tried to get a date in July and September, and the revenue wanted to push this on to February because they didn't have the barristers available, and she wasn't having any of it. So you can see how people like that. And then you had Judge Garrett Simons, where he asked me a very simple question: was this still going on at the time? And I said, yes, it's absolutely going on. The 1,000% VAT overclaim is to this day continuing. So I knew that shocked him at the day, and so we have to meet him again in September. At that stage, we will be outlining naming all of the individuals that are involved in this, right back to the people that designed this from KPMG, and that were in these processing plants, and to show about how Bank of Ireland and insurance company, select insurance company, were involved in this. So at least that will be very transparent what has happened. And we have been very careful about the information that we can provide. We trying to abide by the rules here by not showing the documentation.
Only go so far, yeah.
But there will come a day where we will show the actual these companies that were involved in the fraud, that they were getting legal advice, that what they were doing from senior VAT experts, senior barristers and VAT experts, telling them what they were at was illegal, and they were still doing it. And what they call Revenue's own documents, internal documents, showing that they all knew what was happening here. So all of that will come out. We will present that to everybody. We will explain how this went the whole way through, how we ended up just representing people, that we ended up in the situation we were. So that'll all come out. So the truth will come out, and so we'll be able to demonstrate how wide this is, how it is in select companies in other areas other than poultry, and that there's many politicians are invested in some of these companies that are availing of this, and that'll come out also. So it'll show that this isn't just the select companies that are picked. It's not by accident that they're picked, and that has to come out, because when that comes out, that really means that our taxpayers' money that we're receiving in this country are going to a golden circle. And that is going to be very scary for a lot of people, because a lot of people work very, very hard, try to pay the mortgage, try to rear their children, and for them to think that their taxpayers' money is going to select individuals, that there is scary, because then we have absolute traitors that are representing us.
Yeah, and that's the truth. And there's something rotten in the state of Denmark, as Shakespeare. There I go, quoting Shakespeare, huh? Tell you what, you get everything here. Highbrow. We are highbrow, if not anything else. So there you go. More doom and gloom. But I think it's important. I mean, all of these things are important that we are aware of them and we highlight them and we talk about them, and hopefully action will be taken somewhere down the line. We got to start somewhere, right? But if you want to watch the full, all of that interview, it will be available on our YouTube channels. I might do it over the weekend, see what the weather's like. I'll see. Don't hold me to that, right? I'll try my best. Now, finally, on a lighter note, a man in Horsham, which is in West Sussex in southern England, accidentally ordered 500 pizzas instead of 50 and decided to throw a massive pizza party for the whole town. Everyone enjoyed free pizza and the town had a surprisingly fun and memorable day. We leave it on that. Do get in touch if you have a story to tell. You can follow us on any of our social media platforms, on X at Moth News. We're on Instagram, Moth_news, YouTube at Moth_news. And you can watch all of our previous live shows, and all the interviews are up there for you to peruse and look back on. We will be back as always next Friday at 3 o'clock. Do watch out for incidental and accidental and sometimes on purpose interviews that happen during the week. And yeah, that's it from us. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and be kind and enjoy your weekend. Good luck.